Hi everyone, welcome back to Byte Marx. We haven't done an episode with just Callum and I in quite a while. Blame the scheduling issues for that, but we're back, and we're here to talk about a game that has been on our minds for quite a while.
Well,
But before we do that,
I haven't thought about this game in years.
well, you've played a lot more of them than
That's
I
why
have.
that's why I haven't thought about it in years.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Far Cry, and specifically the way that the Far Cry series has evolved. Callum, why don't you tell the audience about the genesis of this idea?
Well, what an interesting way to say that. Emilio didn't clear this with me before recording, just by the way, so let me vamp for a moment. Basically, we were talking about rebellions. We wanted to do an episode about rebellions in video games, and we were trying to think of, what's a good series of games that has a lot of rebellions in them. Emilio thought, Half-Life, but we already did an episode on Half-Life. I thought that maybe, Just Cause, but there's not a whole lot you can say about Just Cause. I mean, it's about rebellion, but it's, only really one of them. And then we thought Far Cry could fit into so many games, could fit into rebellion simply by whether or not you define rebellion in a certain way. And I think that's what we need to do first.
Yes. So why don't you give your definition and then I will give mine.
Okay, I think rebellion is a smaller group fighting against the tyranny of a larger group that acts in their own self-interest.
Interesting. How does the definition that you have require is it contingent on the player's relation to the rebellion? Or is it not?
I think, unfortunately, that's a tough call. I think that it's okay if the player becomes a part of the rebellion, but say they weren't initially involved. Or maybe even they're not there for the sake of the rebellion. It can still be a game about a rebellion, even though the character doesn't themselves really care about the outcome.
Yeah, because this is an issue that will come up when we start actually talking about the Far Cry games. Because, broadly speaking, you could make an argument that pretty much all of the Far Cry games, except for Far Cry 1,
and
are
Instincts.
about rebellion. Yeah, and Instinct. But the issue is that, for the most part, the player character really either doesn't care about what's going on, and it's just really a side sort of background issue, or they're really just not interested in it, and the rebellion is a backstory for telling a personal story about the character and their development and their arc.
I mean...
And I think that...
And, it's so dumb sometimes. Because, for instance, RJ Gali, the main character of Far Cry 4, gets embroiled in that rebellion because he promised his mom that he would scatter her ashes in their home country. My dude, after you watch the king of this country kill a man with a pen, and then he kidnaps you in his helicopter back to his mountain villa, I think you're allowed to say fuck this and then just scatter your mom's ashes in a parking lot somewhere and leave.
It's really funny. The instigating plot of Far Cry 4, right? Yeah, that's Far Cry 4, is really, really similar to the instigating plot of the new God of War game. Because that game also is basically kickstarted by the mother character being like, hey, you have to go to this dangerous place and scatter my ashes. And then, and then it basically kickstarts this massive world-ending journey.
Yeah, and
it's really funny.
Pagan Min and Boulder from Far Cry 4 and God of War 4, respectively, both come out to meet you.
Yeah. There are a lot of similarities between the, now that I think about it, because, well, there's also that mystical element to Far Cry 4, which isn't really present in as many of the other games.
Oh, no, there is a huge mystical element in every one of the games from, a certain point onwards.
Yeah, sure, but, this is the first time I feel like the mystical element is, very directly integrated into it in a way that's just...
What? Far Cry 3 had the Tataus, which were literal magical tattoos.
Okay, sure.
They say
but
in
the
game,
magical tattoos.
these are magical tattoos.
Yeah, but the magical tattoos are just it's your leveling up sort of.
What about all the
progress
spirit
meter.
quests you go on in Far Cry 3?
I don't know. For me, the Far Cry 3 suffers from a problem of like, I would guess sort of a tourist interpretation of like culture, because Jason doesn't really care about any. He doesn't spend any of the time really learning about that culture. It's just kind of an instrument of his power.
I mean, to
Whereas
be fair, he's
AJ
got a
has
lot on his mind.
No, I mean, if I was fighting, crime lords and pirates, sure, I wouldn't stop to be like, hey, what's the history of this place? But it's really.
So how's your day going?
It's really a background. I feel in contrast to like AJ is going to do. His mother is from Ajay is going to do he's going to do this thing. It's important to his mother. He's a karate American. There's like the culture of the karate people are like deeply interwoven, especially in terms of like the way that the ending of that game goes.
I didn't finish the game, so I didn't know how it ends.
So there's gonna be spoiler alerts for
me.
a lot of this stuff. Yeah, for Callum and
I don't care. Just spoil the hell out of it for me. I got to the point, I got to a point where you were in a prison, and you had to like fight this demon lady who used drugs to make you think. Here's the thing also, is that in Far Cry games, the people who take you on spirit quests through drug-induced hallucinations are oftentimes women.
Ooh, yeah. Actually, isn't that also in Far Cry 6? Isn't
And
like
Primal.
the lady that sorry, Far Cry 5. The lady who takes you on the spirit quest. She's also oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's in 5, it's in 3, it's in 4. In Primal, there is a dude who's like a shaman who takes you on spirit quests, but there's also a lady chief of a tribe who takes you on spirit quests and is evil. And that's usually how it goes. The evil one that takes you on spirit quests is the lady.
Well, there's no like a deeper meaning, embroiled with Ubisoft's wider cultural problems of, sexism and misogyny. That's totally not.
Yeah. Also, isn't it
that's
funny
totally
that the least rebellious company in the games industry keeps making games about rebellion?
Ooh, and also how they insist. Callum, I have to tell you about this, but like on the Wikipedia page for Far Cry 6, there's a statement that says this game was designed to be political. And I read that.
Emilio told me this like 2 minutes before we started recording, and it's still funny.
It's so funny because I read that statement like, a Far Cry game designed to be political?
What was the political ramifications of the dinosaurs in Blood Dragon?
Oh my goodness. It's really funny to me because every Far Cry game has been political. Like, basically all of them, really, if you really want to make an argument about that. But the company has had a consistent desire to distance themselves from the consequences of their sort of political statements or lack thereof.
I mean, who wouldn't want to distance themselves from Ubisoft statements?
Oh yeah, no, that's true. I really, really do feel bad for the developers, because it's not like these games are badly made per se.
No, that's
you could make
that's the MO of Ubisoft. I wrote an article about this once. None of Ubisoft, well, not about Ubisoft specifically. There isn't enough time in the day, but none of the games or sequels that Ubisoft puts out are bad. They're all just like fine.
Yeah. The company is kind of stuck in a holding pattern, in a way.
I did actually want to ask you about something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that it's a problem that Ubisoft's like method of creating anthology series, like how you don't need to play Far Cry 4 to play Far Cry 5, do you think that that's creating this culture of constantly recycling their fan base so their template is old, but it never seems old to newer fans?
That is a really interesting question. It actually touches on some ideas that I had about sort of the way their game design kind of works. But yeah, actually, I do think it is an issue because there really isn't any continuity. But this has kind of been a feature basically since sort of the entire inception of the franchise. Look at Far Cry 1. Far Cry 1 is about a mercenary guy who basically is... Far Cry 1 is like an 80s action movie, really. Because it's about a guy who washes up on an island. He's fighting mercenaries. The mercenary guy is like named Krieger, which is, come on.
Of course he is.
And they're fighting. Eventually, there's a plot with like mutants, and then
it's biomutants, and stuff.
It's sci-fi nonsense. Like sci-fi is 80s. You would expect Arnold Schwarzenegger to show up and pull out like an M60 machine gun and like dual wheel. It's ridiculous.
Well, and here's the thing.
But then look at Far Cry 2.
Such a Ubisoft wasn't even being original back in the day because that was a staple of the gaming industry for a while.
Yeah, really, Ubisoft has this issue where a lot of the times they don't necessarily have... They're very lenient in sort of...
You can just say they're bad. What's the word? You don't have to be clever about this.
Yeah, they're very permissive, I think. Not permissive. They're very... they keep mum. They're not very open about their influences, where they take them from. I feel sometimes, they just copy things that are happening, and then they do it in a way that's a lot more amenable, and so you can kind of get, because the Ubisoft franchise is not the pioneer of the open world game, but when I think of an open world game, I think of a Ubisoft game.
Yeah, it's like someone came out with the idea of jalapeno chips, right? And then Ubisoft makes mild jalapeno chips.
Oh yeah, and because it's less spicy, a lot more people eat it.
Yes, so, but it has less flavor.
Yeah, well, I've always described Ubisoft games to people who don't play them as like really, really wide pools, but the pool is very, very shallow.
And there's leaves in it, and something's at the bottom, and you don't want to get into that pool. Find a different pool.
Yeah, but before we get too far off topic, I actually wanted to ask you a question. So, the Far Cry games, if you chart their evolution, actually, basically the first two games are, to some extent, mechanically and thematically very different from the other games that follow on in the series. I would argue that Far Cry 2 is probably the most political game in the entire series.
Yeah, I can see that.
But it's Far Cry 3 where they start where the formula... So, question one, do you agree with me that Far Cry 3 is where the actual formula of the Ubisoft open world game is set, right?
Like where it comes from?
Yeah, where it comes from. Because in Far Cry 3... Yeah, Far Cry 2 is an open world game, and Far Cry 1 is not really open world. Far Cry 1 is actually in between, because it's so old. Yeah. It's like, some of the levels are actually linear, especially when you're indoors, but for the most part, it's kind of like an open world. And Far Cry 2 is like legitimately an open world game, and it's so open world you actually have to use a map. They have a diegetic
I remember that. It was really cool.
I loved it. It made navigation feel like an actual thing, and you didn't have to suffer from the Skyrim beacon syndrome, where you just move in straight lines across the world without any real consideration to the actual local terrain. Like, one of the worst things to happen to video games, I think, in terms of experiences, is that idea of like just beacon-orientated navigation. Instead of like actually navigating through the space, you just follow the beacon. And
I don't know. Sometimes it's necessary. Like, sometimes I can see the benefit of having it over not having it. But I agree with you. And also, I do agree with you. I think Far Cry 3 is probably where the formula, maybe not started, but was like, it was the genesis of the formula that we have today.
In a lot of ways, I think, actually, Far Cry 3 is a combination of Far Cry 1 and Far Cry 2, right? Because it has a lot of the mechanical elements from Far Cry 2. You've got an open world, right? You've got these big wide maps. You've got the ability to do stealth and also do like upfront action. Although, let's be real, guys. If you're playing a Far Cry game, you are definitely 100% just picking like a sniper rifle or the quietest weapon and usually just sniping out the outpost and then...
Yeah.
Right? Because that's how I always play these games. It's...
100%.
Right? It's the stealth archer problem, but
I mean, the only time I've ever gone loud is when I've been caught, or like I got bored.
Yeah. Or the game forces you to go loud,
Yeah.
right? There's a famous mission in Far Cry 3 where you have to burn the weed field, and they play Skrillex in the background. And your character is clearly just getting high while he's burning the weed field. And
that is peak early 2000s.
Yeah, but you see, like, there are lots of those wacky moments that you wouldn't necessarily feel out of place in an 80s science fiction, in an 80s sort of sci-fi action
Well, actually,
movie,
now
right?
that you say that, let me just real quick throw in here. Isn't it crazy how this is a series predicated on the idea of rebellion, kind of, sort of, but almost every big moment in it, even in the games that are actually about rebellion, almost every big moment in it is like a cinematic set piece with a very linear like progression through it.
Yeah, that is actually a very good point, you know, now that I think about it, because if some of the most pivotal, impactful moments in any of the Far Cry games that I can think of, like at the end, it's just almost like a cutscene that you just kind of get to make a choice, you know? It's weird how much the game is like, oh, you have all this player agency, but in the major sort of story elements, not really, right? Like mechanically you have agency, but story-wise you have relatively little agency.
What's the point of being able to sneak up on the guy or go in guns blazing or whatever when the end result is always the same? It makes choices don't matter now.
Yeah, there were some parts in Far Cry 3 I remember when I was playing, and I would like sneak into the base, and I would be like, no one would see me. I would take out all the guys, right? Raise no alarms. And then I would enter the mission, and the cutscene would be like, and there's a guy behind the door who just hits me. I was like, what? How did this guy who was behind the door waiting this entire time get me when I took out the whole base without anyone else realizing I was there? Like, is his job just to stand there and hit me? It feels like...
Why are these Golden Path Warriors or whatever they were called, why are they super cool with fighting with me when I've just whipped out 3 rocket launchers that I had on my person?
Yeah, the problem is that, like, so, how do I put it? So Ubisoft has this issue where I feel like from a story perspective, because the game is so open world, and because you can, you know, approach the missions in any kind of order that you want, they have this issue where if they still want to have a story, they have to have these major areas where they force the player to do something, right? And generally speaking, because the world is so open and they can't account for, oh, you took down all of these strongholds before you did this story mission, you know, realistically, if you were leading a rebellion and you took over a bunch of territory and then you did the mission, you know, the story mission to take over that one stronghold, it'd be like, hey, wait a minute, we took out all these other guys, these guys should be a cakewalk. But the game is like, wait a minute, he hasn't done the story mission yet, so we're still going to throw a bunch of guys at him, you know? And because it's so open world that a lot of the meaning of the story actually just gets removed, because almost in a way the player is not really that important to the story.
You see, I don't
you're
think
kind
that
of just along for
it's
the ride.
open world. I don't think it falls into open world because of that reason. You know what's open world? The concept in Breath of the Wild where you can just go and fight Ganon at the beginning. Like, if you really want to. That's open world. Yeah,
you can kill him right at the start of the game. You probably won't, but...
You can just go and fight him. Like, you don't have to do any side quests. But the reason you do that is because it makes that final fight easier. That's the point of an open world. You should be exploring the world for the rewards and challenges that it brings, with like one central major challenge that you have to overcome. The reason you're exploring the world is to get strong enough to overcome that challenge.
Yeah, and also, generally speaking, the narrative of those kinds of open world games are not necessarily so linearized. Like with Breath of the Wild, because you have to remember things about the past, the way that the storytelling is really good in that game, because the Great Calamity, all that stuff has happened, you're just trying to piece it all together. Yeah. So you can piece together as much of that puzzle as you want to, or you can just completely leave it and
you can go to any of the areas, I think.
Yeah, and that, that actually makes me think, because maybe Far Cry really isn't an open world game in the sense that, because the problem is the story is linear, right? the story is linear, and you can't reconcile a linear story with a non-linear mechanical experience very easily, I don't think.
Yeah, that's like shuffling the pages of a book.
Yeah, exactly. No, did you ever play those choose your own adventure books?
Yeah, I played a bunch of them.
So yeah, they were really fun. I genuinely wish that there were more sort of visual novels based around that kind of, because it's fun. I remember reading them. I was playing the book. You can play books, but those books have essentially a linear story that you can only experience sort of one piece at a time. You can't just jump around the book. You have to follow the instructions, because if you just read the book in any order, or if you even try to read it in the order that it's in the book, the story would make no sense. And if I tried.
I tried reading a play your own adventure book, like from start to finish, and I couldn't, because I had never seen one of them before, and I couldn't figure out why it was so weird.
Oh man, that's actually pretty funny. But yeah, I guess if you're not familiar with the concept and you've only read other normal books, that would be easy. But yeah, the problem with Far Cry stories is they are very linear. They are very linear, actually, and the storytelling in the linear sense doesn't really fit. Another issue, I think, because I do want to talk a little bit about there being some dissonance between the theme of Revolution and sort of the mechanics of Revolution. So I don't think it's a coincidence that, in terms of the structure that all of these games are built around, is we have a sort of a province-based map. We have different areas. You have to liberate some outposts. You have to go to like radio towers or radio tower equivalents, and that unlocks like a bunch of the map. Now, on paper, that is mechanically, I suppose, a very good way of getting your characters, your players, to explore the place. Right? But if we think about it, in terms of a revolution, generally speaking, the force that you're fighting against has overwhelming power. That's why you kind of have to fight them
piece by piece.
Piece by piece. So on the one hand, it does make sense that you will take over provinces piece by piece, because revolutions happen in that kind of piecemeal way. But the problem with the way that it's executed is that the enemy forces don't really respond to the fact that you're taking their provinces. If the Empire in Star Wars, they cracked down hard. They destroyed planets.
And that was like on the threat that something might be happening.
Yeah, they destroyed Alderaan just to spite Princess Leia. They didn't, Alderaan was not like posing an imminent present danger to them. They just destroyed it. So realistically, whenever I've played a lot of these Far Cry games, I will start taking over the provinces, and gradually I feel like, hey, the rebellion is actually getting somewhere, right? But then the NPCs don't really do anything. They just kind of sit in their base and defend it. The enemy NPCs, the enemy faction, they don't really try to take it back from me. They don't like, hey, wait a minute, we just lost a province. What do we should do something about this. We shouldn't just let them roll us.
Why am I the gun-toting liberator of this land? Yeah?
Yeah, it's weird, because
why don't you do
revolutions...
something?
Yeah, almost in a way, did you ever play the original Stalker? Like
Stalker?
The Stalker 1 or 2?
I haven't played any of the Stalker games.
Oh, okay, well, those games are very interesting. They are pretty difficult games. And I remember that there was either an urban legend or kind of like one of those internet, rumors.
Creepypasta.
That the NPCs... No, not a creepypasta. It was basically just that during the development of the first Stalker game, the NPCs have a lot of freedom, right? So basically the issue was that on the higher difficulties, the NPCs would just finish the game. And you would just be playing, they would just do the main story.
That's like, that sounds like a thing EA would design.
Yeah, so the idea is that the game is an open world, right? You can, generally speaking, go anywhere except for the limits of like hard radiation and stuff like that. If you can't go to a place, you need to develop the technology or get radiation defense or whatever, right? But the idea was that the story missions are just missions that people are posting into the world. So NPCs could technically do them. So hypothetically speaking, I was reading, stories about, I was playing the game on the hardest difficulty and suddenly I just got the game over screen. It's like, what happened? Well, it turns out one of the NPCs just did
you were the final boss.
Yeah, you were the NPC. That was Ivan, he's the main character in this story. You were just his NPC, and on the one hand, I love that because that's kind of actually really one of the consequences of an open world game where you're like, hey, adventure world, you're taking strongholds, you're fighting enemy armies, you're doing these cool missions. And the game still, however, has to center around you because, the story is too afraid to like get loose, jettison you a little bit in a way, right? It has to still center around you. Everything that is plot important has to happen around you. You can take over the whole map and the enemies are like, wait a minute, because you haven't done this one story mission, the rebellion is not winning, And it's weird. It's really, really weird because hypothetically, if you took over the whole map, then maybe the rebellion could just, kind of win. They don't need
just
you
have,
to
like,
assault the
better
enemies.
stuff. Like, show the enemies being underpowered because I put the work in.
And unfortunately, I think you have this issue where balancing an open world game is really hard. Because if you were to make the enemies weaker as the game went on, right, then you would have a reverse difficulty curve, which I don't know if is necessarily satisfying.
I know they've been a huge thing lately, but what do you think of like time loops being used in open world games?
Oh yeah, well there have been a lot of time loop games. There's Deathloop and
Other ones.
A bunch of yeah.
There's that one that's set in Rome, whose name I forgot, and there was another one.
Yeah, there was that one with Willem Dafoe. Yeah, look, I don't have a lot of money to play games. I mostly listen to other people talk about them, which is what I imagine you're listening to us do right now.
Hey, welcome to the party.
Subscribe. I do actually think that an open world time loop game could.
Well, it would essentially just be Majora's Mask, wouldn't it?
There is a game that I saw recently called Heilwart. It's an indie horror game, right? You play as a person in a mental asylum.
Of course.
And yeah, like this really wackadoo mental asylum.
The mental asylum is the horror equivalent of your parents' farm in a fantasy story.
Yeah, or the random tropical island in a Ubisoft game.
I was gonna say that the Far Cry 3 when you said it's like a combined Far Cry 1 and 2. It's like it took all the gameplay and story elements from Far Cry 2, and from Far Cry 1 it took the island. Yeah,
because let's be real, people, generally speaking, love blowing up tropical islands, right? I feel like there's this thing in a gamer's mind where he sees a tropical island and he goes back to like the primal lizard brain to destroy pristine environments, I think. Also, these games emphasize their destruction physics. In Far Cry 2, you could like literally just set everything on fire.
I mentioned this on stream once with Miles. Go and check out Miles, my friend, who I go on his streams regularly so that you can come back and check out us. I mentioned on stream that being able to set South Africa on fire ended up being so prophetic for a game that came out in like 2004.
Well, Far Cry is not South Africa. It is some random East African country.
Yeah, they speak in South African accents.
There are South African. Look. So I did a video on this. There's a video on this about sort of the amoral Afrikaner trope in media, which is like, if there's a South African person in a video game or a movie show, there's like a 90% chance they're an Afrikaans guy and they have connections to like all the shady stuff that the apartheid government did. So yeah, there's the video on this, like, what's his name, Blisk from Titanfall.
Does he have connections to the apartheid government? I didn't know that in my initial playthrough.
No, but he's like from Johannesburg.
Yeah, he's like, Hazard, but your robot is looking good. I don't know what accent that was.
It's
I live in this country.
It's wild to me.
I've heard people from Johannesburg before.
Yeah, it's wild to me that you have a character who's like hundreds of years into the future. You have a South African person. And it's like, oh yeah, where are they from? Oh, they're Afrikaans. Why? They're like a mercenary type, and it's like, oh yeah, they're meant to evoke the period of like, hardcore South African Defense Forces, Spec Ops guys, the people who were doing, excuse me, and excuse you, the people who are doing all the terrible, shady stuff on, the behest of the apartheid government. But back to the time loop. We're looping this conversation.
We're in a time loop.
Ooh, we have to do content every month. Oh no.
But here's what I'm saying. Basically, integrate save points into parts of the world. So you can make like a save point, or you hit a certain place where it's a save point, and you go into an area and you do stuff, but you have a time limit in every area. Like some areas, you have to do their thing in like 5 days.
Yeah, it is kind of funny to me, speaking about days, that despite the fact that you have these open world games, time is generally speaking not a factor.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to do missions in a specific number of days, usually, or, within a specific time frame or at a specific date or whatever. It seems like time is completely meaningless. And yeah, I do feel like that might add something, but maybe it would make the game less casual, right?
True.
Because you can't do everything. Like, a good example of this is Fallout 1. Fallout 1 has a time limit. If you don't... Spoilers for Fallout 1, I guess. If you don't solve the main quest of Fallout 1 within a certain number of days, you will lose. And there's very little that you can do to stop the counter. Granted, the counter is pretty generous, so you do have time to explore the world, but when I played Fallout 1 for the first time and I didn't have any idea what to do, I was constantly worried about running out of time. And I did actually run out of time a few cases,
Yes, but
maybe the time loop thing...
Point.
Yes.
It's not it's kind of open world-ish, sort of. It's more like there's lots of different areas you can go. Persona 5, which I've been playing recently. I've almost finished with it. Or Persona 5 Royals. What's great about that is that basically you do get a calendar, and every day matters because you get a deadline. So you run into the person whose cognition you have to change. You have to go into their palace and beat the boss and whatever. And they usually give you a thing like there's this gangster who's like the third boss or something. He is going to release pictures that he took of you and your friends in a club where he included...
That's pretty creepy.
Well, he included like shots of alcohol and drugs and stuff. And your main character's on probation.
Ah, okay. I thought you were going to say because they're like, high schoolers or whatever.
Yeah, they are. But
yeah,
like,
okay.
They weren't in the club to like do drugs and shit. they were going there because they were trying to change the cognition of this guy in the first place, and then one of their members got caught, and now this guy's like holding this photo of them over them as blackmail, and he says like, if you don't get me 3 million yen in 2 weeks, then I'm going to release these photos.
Okay. So how do they do the time loop stuff?
Well, it's not time loop. But this
sorry. How do they do the schedule?
Okay, so basically what happens in Persona is you have 2 slots in the day where you can do something. Afternoon and evening. And you can either, go and talk to your friends to get their social levels up so that they can have stronger abilities and stuff. Or you can go and... train your social abilities so that you don't run into a wall later on, because sometimes it says you need, like, a higher charm stat to talk to this person.
You can tell this game was made by introverts.
Yeah. Well, also, weirdos, because guess kindness is a stat.
Yep, made by weirdos.
Sure.
Anyway.
Then you can also use your time, building tools, or going shopping, or going into like the general sort of open-ish world dungeon crawl section, or you can go into the palace itself and start doing the story stuff. But you have to balance how you use your time most effectively within the 23 days or whatever. And it's a pretty casual game. Like, it can be intense if you put the difficulty all the way up, but I don't, because I don't need to prove anything to myself. So, at like, easy difficulty, it feels pretty casual. You're just, like, chilling, listening to these Japanese teens talk about cognitive science, and, like, drinking coffee and shit, and then, like, sometimes you fight a demon.
Oh, that is pretty cool. I definitely missed that in my high school phase of fighting demons and also doing all of that other stuff. But speaking of making tools, I do want to circle this back. Time loop.
Yeah, time loop.
Back to when we were talking more about Far Cry. So there are a couple of things that I think are really interesting in the wider context of sort of Rebellion. I think the first is that from Far Cry 3 onwards, the games have crafting mechanics and RPG mechanics, right? Because what's not present in Far Cry 1 and Far Cry 2 are the ability to craft items by hunting animals and like gathering resources, and also to level up and gain skills, right?
Yeah.
So that, I think, is a very interesting idea to have, because all of the other Far Cry games from Far Cry 3 onwards have had this system, right? To various degrees of complexity. And I have to wonder if by making it an RPG, or adding RPG elements, because everything is an RPG now, that has undermined some of the story beats. Because Far Cry 3 is about being a guy who survives a terrible situation, but you can like become a stealth tiger god, with your tattoos.
But I think that's the point. I think
you think it's the point. It's a power fantasy.
Yeah, well, it's meant to be like you don't really watch anime, so it's hard to. There's a lot of this stuff happens a lot in anime, but it's basically just like you go through a terrible situation, and you acclimatize to it, and you get better at it, and you fight back, and you get stronger and stronger and stronger, and then at the end you realize, okay, I'm kind of meant to be here now, because I'm not capable of doing anything else.
Yeah, that is kind of funny. One of the endings for Far Cry 3 is you can choose to stay on the island. You can, I guess, to use the game sim, you can basically surrender to your inner darkness and become like a island warlord. Now, granted, that ending has you die.
Yeah, that's the bad ending, which is wild, because how is the drugged up flamethrower hunter supposed to acclimatize back into society?
Yeah. There is this, I think, the Heart of Darkness, I think, was an inspiration for Far Cry 3, and there definitely is this theme that you can't necessarily go back to where you were, after having killed people. Yeah, again, there's that similar theme is present in Far Cry 2, right? At the end of Far Cry 2, again, spoilers, you can't win. You either blow up a bridge and die, or bribe some mercenaries and die.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you can't necessarily go back to society after what you've seen. The game is meant to be like, oh, this civil war has caused so much trauma, so much damage that you can't go back.
Yeah, you are forever changed.
You're forever changed. And
in that
I kind of have to wonder.
In that Far Cry 2 mercenary is dead. That's a pretty big change.
Yeah, one of the problems, I think, about the way that Ubisoft does their storytelling is I think they have an issue of sort of binary thinking. So Yahtzee did an episode, I think it was called Extra Punctuation, and he talked about how video games tend to give you a lot of video games tend to give you a choice, and I think he was using Dying Light 2 as if there are two factions, the two factions will be ordered but oppressive, or chaotic but like libertarian, right?
Yeah.
So, and the idea is that basically it's a very weird binary choice because no one wants to be a fascist, or at least most people don't want to be a fascist. But in order to counterbalance the fact that the order guys are generally speaking quite fascistic, because let's be real, most of them tend to be, they have to make the libertarian guys, who would generally speaking just be the good guys, they have to make them crazy. They have to make them incapable of actually like making a society.
Yeah, because there have to be bad for both. But that's the thing, is they make it like both sides are bad choices.
Yeah, so Far Cry 2 was doing this way before the curve, where the fact that you're caught between two different rebel groups in a fictional East African country, and both sides are just bad. Whichever side you side with to defeat the other side, they'll still turn on you at the end. There's no good outcome there, and that's generally speaking reflective of sort of the real world reality of those kinds of wars, for Blood Diamonds.
Yeah, and then it takes you a super long time to get to the point where you just like talk to a journalist.
Yeah, there's and also, Far Cry 3 actually broke with the tradition to some extent because one of the endings is actually much better than the other. You don't die, you don't become a warlord, you leave the island, you don't kill your friends. But Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 5 and to some extent Far Cry 6 have just gone back to the
both endings
there's
are
no
bad.
good option.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to give you an example, spoilers for the ending of Far Cry 4. If you had to guess, how do you think Far Cry 4 would end?
Well, I ended Far Cry 4 in like 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, you got the Easter egg.
Yeah, I got the Easter egg. If you play Far Cry 4 and you don't leave the room,
at the beginning of the game.
It just like ends.
Yeah. Pagan comes back and he's like, "Hey, that's cool. Let's just do this thing that you wanted to do."
Oh, hey, you're here. Cool. I was expecting you to leave. It's chill, though. Let's go and, like, rule the country. And then you just do, I guess.
Right. So, let's say you play to the end of the game.
Yeah, nowhere close.
You do have an option. Once you eventually go to the shrine, right, and you can put your mother's ashes, then Pagan will take a helicopter and he can go, and he'll leave the country in your hands. Then, at that point, you can actually just shoot him down if you want to. You don't have to, but you can just shoot him down. But the real ending is the Golden Path sees Kirat. And it depends on who you sided with. So if you put Amira in charge, then Kirat becomes an authoritarian drug state. They have like little child soldiers.
Jesus.
But if you side with Bajra, then if you side with Sabal, that's his name. If you side with Sabal, then it becomes a patriarchal fundamentalist theocracy. Women they don't have any rights. It becomes a religious place.
Oh God, I don't. Are the child soldiers well paid at least?
No, they're conscripted.
That could be character building, I guess. Depends how many wars we fight. Man, yeah, that's a bad one. I don't want to play this game anymore.
Yeah, see the problem, and Far Cry 5 does that as well. There's either like a nuke.
How did the priest dude set off a nuke? By the way.
Well, I guess it was serendipity that the nuke exploded when he did, or maybe it was all in your head, or the game kind of played a little bit fast and loose. And at the end of Far Cry 6, there's no good ending either because the war still carries on. See, there's a central theme when I look at this, and the problem is you can have a rebellion as a inciting, interesting plot point, because it's cool. You have a natural sort of protagonist power arc, start from nothing, build your way up. You can have cool villains or whatever. But the problem is it's very difficult to actually see a revolution to its end, right? It's very difficult to actually do this. And very few of these games actually focus on what happens afterwards, right? Because invariably, the aftermath of a successful revolution is almost as complicated as the revolution itself. In many ways, it's, to borrow a quote about paraphrase from Genghis Khan, it's very easy to rule the world, to conquer the world from horseback. Dismounting and ruling it, that's very hard. So a lot of these rebel groups, these rebellions that overthrow a regime, kind of just end up doing all of the same problems of the regime itself,
or having totally new problems.
Or having totally new problems that don't really feel satisfying. Now, you could argue that that's kind of the point, because real life is not satisfying in that way, but there are these issues where you're playing this game and you're giving the player a lot of agency, right? You're making them almost a messianic figure in the eyes of the audience, because let's again be real. This is a power fantasy. Your character single-handedly changes the course of a revolution, which is not a kind of thing that most people in those kinds of situations would ever really be able to do. You can point to a handful of leaders throughout history that have single-handedly changed the course of the revolution. And those people did not do it by fighting on the front lines with like a giant Bowie knife and like a tiger.
Can you imagine if like the story of George Washington was just like that America movie they made on Netflix, which is a giant spoof of the American Revolution, where George Washington has like chainsaw hands?
Oh, I was gonna say, can you imagine like the Russian Revolution, but like Lenin is like
a ninja.
He's a ninja. Yeah, he's fighting with a katana and an Uzi, and he's just like taking out.
Lenin's like a Jedi. But that, you see, that exactly what you mentioned is why I think Far Cry 3 is still the best one. Because it's on the nose. that Jason Brody's supposed to be this almost messianic figure. Because he has literal magical tattoos. Like, they go out of their way to say, like, you know, you are pumped full of drugs, you are hunting this place basically to extinction, and you have these magical tattoos. It is no wonder that you are the best at doing this.
Yeah. Also, I have to say that I think the interesting thing about Far Cry 3 is that Jason is not really in it for the revolution, right?
Yeah.
He's just a guy who was thrown into this crazy situation, and he just has to battle from first dealing with Voss and his pirates to Hoyt.
Finally, we're talking about
pirates.
revolution with 15 minutes left.
And the problem is that Jason just is trying to survive. He's trying to protect his friends. He's trying to get home. He doesn't actually care about really the struggle.
Yeah.
Only towards the end could you argue that he really becomes invested in it, but I never felt personally invested in the struggle with the Rakyat against, you know, the pirates, because I don't really feel like the story did enough to make me care about them. And realistically speaking, Jason is just a spoiled American kid. Really, to argue that he would care about all of this and that he would not want to immediately run away over, you know, the course of the story and just leave is kind of ridiculous. That's why I feel like the bad ending of Far Cry 3 just kind of jumps out of nowhere.
I mean, it's not even,
because there's no indication.
It's not even that he's like spoiled, because he definitely is spoiled. Like, don't get me wrong, but like, it's not even that. It's that he is a survivor of an incredibly traumatic experience. The second he has the opportunity to leave with his friends, he would.
Yeah. As soon as it became realistically possible for him to do that, they would all bail, right? And this game makes a good point of having your friends guilt trip you about having, you know, all the fun that you're having. Like, again, you know, I have to hunt more tiger skins to make a pouch for my, you know, grenades. And yeah, tiger testicles. And your girlfriend is begging you to not become a violent warlord.
Jason, no, stop. Wait, how's that meme go? Jason, babe, it's me. It's Kathy. Please, babe, just look at me. It's fine. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah, and
I made myself laugh.
Yeah, it's really weird. Now, to every extent in Far Cry 4 onwards, that's not the case, right? The character at least has a strong reason to believe in the rebellion, right? Or at least believe in the
except
goals of
because
some
I don't
rebellions.
remember a point where RJ Ghali was like truly invested in the rebellion's plight. He was mostly surviving for a point, and then, like, I think a girl at one point said to him, like, you can either fight or leave. And he's like, no, I'll fight, I guess. And he's always kind of reluctant about it.
He's more committed because, at least to some extent, it is his people, right? He is, at least
but that
to
doesn't
some degree.
mean that you're immediately committed to the cause.
That's true, but he did go to the country
willingly
to do this crazy
guilt
thing.
trip of his mother.
Look, the guilt trips of mothers are legendary powers, Callum. You can't underestimate it. But Jason and his friends just basically they just crashed on that island.
No, they
right?
went there for holidays.
And well, yeah, but they didn't deliberately go out of their. They didn't know it was going to be a pirate stronghold. They didn't know that they were walking into a trap. AJ goes knowing that, you know, the situation is not necessarily the most stable, and in Far Cry 5, that sheriff, the player character, goes to arrest Joseph Seed. So clearly he has a vested
you're
interest.
arguing agency, not necessarily
I'm arguing
investment.
agency. Yeah, I think agency is very important here, because if we're going to have a game where the player character is going to be a messianic kind of godlike figure, their actual ability to make choices is very damn important to me. And, you know, it feels like Far Cry 3 is really where the game stops.
So you're
at least trying to pretend about that.
You're arguing the opposite point of me. In that
well, there's got to be some conflict.
Yeah, I mean, finally. Well, I actually prefer the idea that the messianic figure is forced into the role rather than chooses to go into it. You know,
I would agree with you, but I don't think most of these characters choose to become the messianic figure, but they definitely make a choice to involve themselves in the plot, right?
Yes, but also you have to consider that, like, Jason Brody could have just stayed in the village. But he didn't.
Could he?
He could have. Like, he could have just stayed in the village and helped the villagers fight off the incoming pirates every time they got raided. Like, that was an option for him, but he didn't.
Yeah, but that's not how he would get home, right?
Yes, but
they want to go home. So
yes, but
you kind of have to do some stuff to get home.
Yes, but think about it like from the perspective of what we were saying. He's not an action hero. He's not someone who has training. I don't. Does AJ Gali have training?
No.
Ajay
Gali,
so. Because he's really good at handling a gun, right? For someone who has no training.
Yeah, that is true.
Because I always thought he was he was in special forces or something.
Well, yeah, that is kind of weird. But I suppose maybe the point that they're trying to go with is that anyone can. They're kind of trying to do that. They're trying to do that whole Spider-Man thing where anyone can become Spider-Man. So anyone hypothetically could become, Jason or Ajay.
Yes, except no. Except it takes an enormous amount of drugs and magic and familial trauma to become either of those people. Don't.
Yeah. I guess you do need to do a lot of drugs. You do need to do a lot of drugs.
I mean, at one point, like,
that is true.
I think the most believable in what you were saying, like, I'm starting to see your point. I think the most believable is the sheriff. Well, not the sheriff, the, like, new rookie from Far Cry 5.
The deputy. Yeah. I would think so, because he chooses to basically from their perspective, they're literally just doing a raid on like a crazy, separatist type guy
on a cult.
The American
cult.
Yeah, a cult. Yeah, they're basically raiding a cult, which is the thing that the police, generally speaking, have done. So they don't know that it's going to become this crazy situation with potentially the end of the world. They have no idea that that's really going to happen.
I do like that every Far Cry game from like 4 onwards seems to have a point where you can just give up and get an Easter egg ending, because you can't just choose not to arrest this guy and then your sheriff says like, no, if we tried to arrest him, we'd be dead.
Yeah. I think to some extent maybe they have to recognize a little bit that the plot kind of doesn't really make sense. You know, how in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones is kind of irrelevant to the plot.
Yeah.
Because if he isn't there, the Nazis would just die in the desert with the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
So, in a similar way, without the player's involvement in these stories, everything would be the same, more or less.
I mean, except no. Because as we've said before, the priest of this crazy cult somehow sets off a nuke. Maybe.
But would he have set the nuke off if he didn't feel like the government were going to destroy him?
Yeah, probably, because he prophesies the Great Collapse, which is the setting off of the nuke.
Well, we don't know if that's necessarily his doing.
No, he says at the end, like, this is... Well, yeah, we don't know how he could have or what happened, but he prophesized it. So it might have been that he would win anyway just because of that, and he'd have all of his crazy family members still.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that the agency of the player is important when we're trying to contextualize this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Revolutions are ideological. More than anything else, if you're going to want to oppose a system, you have to understand that system that you're trying to oppose, and you have to have an idea of what you're going to replace it with. And I feel like the Far Cry games don't really talk about what comes next. They don't really give you enough context to feel like you're fighting for something that's actually real. At least, with Far Cry 2, you're a mercenary. You're there to get blood diamonds. You don't really become involved in the story. The hero of that...
Well, you're there to kill the jackal, who just keeps being nice to you.
Yeah. The hero of Far Cry 2 is the jackal.
Yeah.
Because he's the only one that seems to actually really give a damn. But, and, in Far Cry 3, Jason just wants to leave. Fair. I would want to leave as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good reason. I'm good. I'm down with that.
In every... Yeah, I don't want to hunt tigers and cut, get their scrotums so I can make a purse to carry grenades. I wouldn't leave. But the other games don't really do that. They kind of need you to to do stuff. They need you to be involved in a way that I feel undermines their actual theme. And also, like, let's be real, they don't spend as much time giving you a reason to fight, right? I know it says that, hey, Far Cry 6 is a political game, but for a game that is supposed to be political, it doesn't really give you all that much care. You know, it falls into this problem, all these Far Cry games, they fall into that problem, kind of what Yahtzee was talking about, where the two sides are not really good. Or that you really have the feeling that you can make a meaningful decision between crazy and a different type of crazy, you know, crazy with a different shade of blue.
Yeah, I think they fall into the trope of course they would syndrome. Like, I shouldn't just put the word syndrome at the end of things. That's tacky. But, like, of course they would. Like, why does Ajay Ghali fight in this revolution? Well, he's a video game character. Of course he would. You know?
Yeah, what else is he going to do?
Yeah.
Scatter his mother's ashes and then leave?
In a nicer place? In a place that's not in a civil war? Crazy. Or, like, why does the rookie not try and escape to get help? Because...
Yeah.
Like, he's a video game character. Of course he wouldn't. Of course he would stay here and fight.
Yeah. Even the player character in Far Cry 6, who is an actual
ex-military
guerrilla fighter, right? An ex-military guerrilla fighter. Really, you don't get the feeling that they care really all that much, or that there is really something, you know, worth fighting for, except for that the bad guys are bad and the rebellion are the rebellion.
Well, it's like that. It's similar-ish to the point that you brought up, but somehow more vague. Like, this is her country. Of course she would fight for it. No. A country is just a place. You know? You have to show me connection to the people. You have to show me, like, maybe good memories there. Or, like, a big reason why she wants to fight for this. Or, like, that she has an idea of a better way that they can do things. People don't just fight for the sake of it.
Yeah. They don't. People are not like peasants in Warcraft 3, where if you click a button, they all immediately run to the town center and pick up arms. That's a joke for like two people in our audience. Actually, let me ask you this: do you feel like it would be better if maybe, and we're almost out of time here, but do you feel like it would be better if the game started actually not at the beginning of the revolution, but before the revolution? So like half the game was actually the preamble to declaring revolt, and the other half of the game was the revolution itself.
I think it would be much harder to build an action game that way, because you would need, it would probably be like almost like a flashback sequence, like 3 weeks ago or something, and it was just like a war-torn country 3 days ago. But yeah, it would probably be just like you training or doing military drills, and then someone mentions something, and then, like, the war gets launched without you knowing.
This is totally impractical, but I actually kind of like the idea of, if there's going to be an action game about fighting in a revolution, there should be a different genre type game before like, for example, imagine if Papers, Please was the sort of the stealth prequel game to, like, the next Far Cry, right?
You have to go through the bureaucracy sim before you're allowed to play the action game. That's awesome.
Yeah. Because, like, at the end of Papers, Please, I love Papers, Please. You guys should.
It's really
play it. Maybe
good.
We'll play it on stream.
Yeah,
sometime.
it's really good.
But at the end of the Papers, Please, I actually felt something about wanting to get rid of the government, because I was like, I was sick of this goddamn bureaucracy, you know. And I really felt something about having to deal with it. And it's like, yeah, now if you give me an action game where I have to depose the Aristocan, you know, government, it's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I just kind of feel like maybe if you're not going to do that kind of storytelling, if you're going to make a game that's not really going to be that strong story-wise, then make another game that is a different genre that doesn't have to have these issues with
the
action,
companion
open
game.
world RPG. The companion game, yeah, exactly. That the companion game to Far Cry 4 could be... I don't know, AJ just chilling, you know?
Drug City Tycoon.
Yeah, Drug City Tycoon. Or Far Cry 6 could have been, you know, some kind of farming simulator. Or Far Cry 5
Valley
was
is just the companion game to Far Cry 6.
Yeah, Yara is actually where the off-screen war in Stardew Valley is taking place.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that's a cool concept. But I want to ask you a question before we're done here.
Yes, go ahead.
Do you think that Far Cry New Dawn is a rebellion game?
No, it's a post-apocalyptic
Well,
game.
here's the thing, though. They are technically rebelling against another group.
Yeah, but it's not like an established society. It's not like an established
there needs
order.
to be a
It's just-
system of governance.
There has to be a huge power imbalance. That's not just like. Would you consider two nation states fighting a rebellion? No.
Well, I suppose like I get what you're coming from, because I saw it and I thought like it strikes me more as like the villagers fighting the bandits.
Yeah, it's a gang war in a sense. There has to be this power imbalance that is not only huge but also structural. Like so, the reason why the empire is stronger than the rebellion is because they have like a tax base that can be turned into a military-industrial complex.
Because the empire has taxes. That's what was stopping Jedi's.
Yeah, and the reason why the rebellion the reason why the rebellions in all these games are weak is because they don't have those institutional structural supports. If you don't have that kind of power, you have to fight in an asymmetrical kind of war against a much larger power.
That's why you always have to capture a farm, drug/food.
Yeah, you have to capture the industry that is required for building a government, right? That's what the essence of the rebellion is. But in a game like New Dawn, you're just fighting you're fighting gangs, right? It's a gang war.
Also, it might not have happened because, like you said, it's kind of left up to the viewer's interpretation on whether or not the nuke actually went off.
My personal theory is that it didn't.
Yeah, I think it didn't.
That's my hot take. I just think the guy was just high as a kite, excuse me, and just Joseph was just doing his proselytizing end of the world thing. It implanted an idea, a seed in your head that it was going to happen, and then your brain made it up that it happened. I don't think it actually.
I think that New Dawn also isn't in the future. I think because like they use regular guns, right?
Well, it's only it's only like 10, 15 years in the future.
Well, yeah, they're well, that's the thing. I think they just like. I think everyone just got high. I think the I think the bliss is what it was called. Because they were pumping it into the water system, right?
Yeah.
So I think like it got like released. The final bliss got released, and you burn it at one point. So like maybe it's just so concentrated in this area now that like everyone is suffering a mass delusion, which is Far Cry New Dawn.
That's not entirely out of it's not entirely out of left field for like a cult group to release a drug and dope everyone, I genuinely do think that it didn't happen, and I do think that New Dawn is an attempt to make an idea of, oh yeah, it did happen, but I just feel like it goes against kind of the theme, right? Because the major themes of all of these Far Cry games is that human beings are the problem, but it's human interpersonal violence. I feel like a nuke is a very impersonal thing to come out of nowhere, right? It would be one thing, it'd be one thing if, say, for example, I think in the DLC of Far Cry 6, there's DLC for Far Cry 5. No, yeah, there's DLC for Far Cry 5 that actually adds in nukes, I think. Oh, wait, no. Oh, no, this DLC... This DLC for a Far Cry game where you play as one of the... you play as Pagan from... this is Far Cry 6, yeah. There's DLC from Far Cry 6 where you play as Pagan, and there's nukes involved there. And I feel like... Yeah, Pagan Min. Whoops.
He's from Far Cry 4.
Yeah, there's a... Yeah, but in the DLC for Far Cry 6, you have a dream sequence where Pagan Min has this whole thing, and the Krayat has... what he was doing this whole time is instead of spending his money on infrastructure, he was spending it on drugs and also a nuclear stockpile. And he tells AJ to use the weapons as he sees fit. So, like, that I could understand.
Far Cry... That's DLC for Far Cry 4.
No.
Far Cry 6 is the one in fake Cuba.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm not crazy. Hear me out, right? So Far Cry 6 has these 3 DLC episodes, and they feature the return of previous Far Cry antagonists.
Why?
All of them are dream sequences.
Why?
Because don't you understand? They've run out of ideas.
Wait, like, okay, who are they? It's Pagan Min.
It's Jason. So you play the first one is Insanity. You play as Voss.
Oh god.
And you have to fight Citra and Jason, and you eventually have a dream, and it turns out it was a dream, and Voss somehow survived, and he's on a beach. And then in the second one, Pagan Min Control, it starts with this whole thing, and then you have to pay. I think you play as Pagan, and then you do this whole thing with the nukes, and the last one is with Joseph Seed.
That's kind of a cool concept. I do kind of like the idea.
I think it's pretty off the wall. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, because none of the main characters in Far Cry, because they're all audience surrogates, so they're all personalityless. But like, I liked Pagan Min, I liked Voss, I liked Jonathan Seed, Joseph Seed.
Joseph.
Well, I don't know Joseph Seed because I didn't play Far Cry 5. But like, I liked some of the villains in the Far Cry games. Because they do tend to be at least somewhat charming. Yeah,
Voss probably will go down as one of the best villains, I think.
Except for the fact that he gets killed halfway through that game, spoilers, and then replaced with someone else.
Yeah, a generic Afrikaans dude.
Which is so weird. Why did you do that? He's on the cover of your game.
Look, dude, the open world design, I feel, is very, very flawed for games that have linear stories, right? So, I think before we start spinning off into another time loop, I think we should end
time loop. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. This has been Byte Marx. I think we've cracked down on the case of Rebellion.
Which is your leave in the comments below which is your favorite Far Cry game,
and actually also leave in the comments which is your favorite Far Cry villain. Mine is Malaria.
Yeah. that's a pretty tough villain.
I couldn't figure out how to beat him.
I'm gonna put the tiger that has been sneaking up on me for like 20 minutes while I snipe the sentries.
What was that? The fucking eagles in Far Cry 4. The worst. All right.
The environment. Yeah.
The environment. Thank you for watching. Go and check out our Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. If you want to hear more from us about this stuff, we do post bonus things on Patreon.
Speaking of, for at least a little bit, if instead of donating to the Patreon, if you donate to one of the links that will be in the description of this video, to the International Red Cross. We will give you access to the patron bonus episodes if you send us proof, a bank receipt, and also the thank you note from the Red Cross. Because Byte Marx is against imperialism, and it's going on in the world right now, and people need some help. It is
insane out there. It is crazy, beyond belief, things that people should never have to go through. So please, if you can spare anything, go to those links. But on slightly lighter news, if you like what you heard here, just subscribe, maybe tap that bell icon so that you can get notifications from us, and let us know what you think in the comments. Please, we need to get feedback from you guys to change up the content if you don't like it. So just let us know.
Yeah, I've been trying to get to 1,000 subs, hopefully.
And more. Tell your friends.
And more. To the moon! Bye, everyone.
Cheers.